Greetings and salutations, welcome to today's video. As you may notice behind me, it looks like I'm in a new setting, but in fact, it's the same room that I'm always in. I'm just trying out something a little bit different today. Really quickly, I want to make a shout out to YouTube user Accelerating Universe for reminding me to make this video. Thank you for that. So what we're going to be talking about today is removing nitrocellulose from frets. So why would you ever need to do that? Well, we're going to be talking about this guitar behind me, as you can see here. I'm going to show you some closer up images of the guitar. If you're new to the channel, I'll tell you a little bit about the guitar. If you're not new, then you probably heard all about it and feel free to skip ahead. What this basically is a Fender Rotoir and Telecaster body that I got from Stratosphere. So it came with all the electronics and the pickups and everything, but I bought an aftermarket neck from Musicraft, and of course I spec'd it out to get all the features that I wanted for the neck. So that said, when I got the neck, it was raw and unfinished, and I had to, either stain it or coat it in some kind of coating, nitrocellulose or polyurethane, and give it a tint to whatever I desired. Essentially, it was a blank slate, and I kind of had to mold it into what I wanted it to be. And since the body of the guitar was already finished in nitrocellulose, and I'm sort of partial to nitro, I decided to finish the neck in nitrocellulose as well. Now, when you spray a maple guitar neck, typically you do not cover up the fretboard, you spray it as well. Of course, you can tape up each individual fret, but it's a lot of work. So most people just end up spraying the whole thing and then removing any spray that gets on the frets at a later time. And that's the method that I chose. However, apparently there's an ideal timeline for you to take the nitro off, because if you wait too long, it can sort of harden and it makes it harder to get the nitro or whatever finish you're using off of the frets. Speaking of which, I have not done this for polyurethane or any kind of urethane finish. I can only speak from personal experience, and I've only used nitro in my case, so I can't say 100% that this method will work for a polyurethane coated guitar, but I believe you can use a similar technique and it'll work in that case as well. If you're interested in the details of how to finish a guitar neck in nitrocellulose, then I made a video that lays it out, and you can check it out by clicking on the eye that's up here in the corner of your screen. A couple of things I'll mention before we get into the content. At some point in the video, I talk about how I'm concerned with taking the crown off the fret using the method that I'm using. And the reason I said that is, to be honest, I never tried this before. It was my first time and I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out. But rest assured, this method did not take the crown off the frets. And by the way, if you don't know what the crown of the fret is, in simple terms, it's the very top of the fret that the string rests on when you fret it. And it has to be not too wide and not too narrow, and typically it's made into the ideal shape by the person who crowns or dresses the frets in the first place. So like I said, with this method, the frets turned out spectacular and great, and there were no problems. Also, at one point in the video, and I point this out with a little note, it looks like the frets that I have already done, as I'm going down the neck, it looks like some of the frets have really bad wear marks in them, like wear marks that you see in a guitar that have been played 20 years and needs a refret. So I can assure you that that's not the case. I think it was a little bit of residual nitrocellulose left over that I needed to go back and just polish off. So I don't know why it looks like that. Maybe it's just the shadows in the video, but when you first glance at it, it looks like, wow, these frets are in really bad shape. But again, they're not. It's just whatever it shows up on the video as, it just kind of looks like that. So that's about it. One last thing though, you'll see the method that I use in this video, but I also talk about some other methods that can be used. And one of those methods that I didn't have an example of at the time is these. So what these are fret guards. So you can put these on top of your fretboard, and the fret, here I'll kind of give you a closer look there. There's one right there, and there's another one of a similar shape and size. And so you put these down on your fretboard over the fret goes in this, obviously in this little space here. And so what it does, it allows the fret to pop up and allows you to work on the fret, but protects your fretboard. Now I got these for $1.22 on Amazon. And like I said, at the time, I did not have them. I ordered them and they're cheap. They come from overseas, somewhere in China maybe. And so I got kind of antsy and I decided to use the method that you'll see in the video on the frets, just because I wanted to get it done and see if it would work. The method I ended up using, and again, it's not a big secret, but you'll see it later on in the video, so I'm not gonna talk about it too much, but the method that I used is super cheap and doesn't take a lot of expenses. This is super cheap also, but I did have to wait a long time to get these. It was $1.22, so not expensive, but it came from overseas, and it took probably a month to get here. These aren't bad, they're made pretty well, but one caution is that one side is very smooth and doesn't pose a problem at all. The other side is kind of rough. They didn't finish it off very well or sand it or polish it. So if you were to put this side, the rough side, down on your fretboard by mistake and started rubbing and stuff like that, you would probably scratch up your fretboard pretty bad. And it's the same on this one as well. There's kind of a smooth side and a rough side. Of course, you go in with a Sharpie or something and mark which one's which so that you'll know and you don't mess up. The other thing is that there's really not a great way to hold these in place if you were to use them and work on the fret. So you'd have to use one hand to kind of hold it down on the fretboard and then the other hand to do any kind of polishing or dressing, what have you. So I think Stuart McDonald sells some of these that are more expensive, and of course you're going to pay for shipping with Stuart McDonald too, but I think they have sort of like a rubber band, for lack of a better term, that goes sort of underneath the neck of the guitar and can hold it in place so that you don't have to have one hand being used to hold it. So like I said, those are some other methods that you could use. If you're a professional luthier, then by all means that's probably something that you want to invest in, but you're probably not watching this video if you're a professional luthier. So I'm just giving you some DIY tips, some things that work on a budget, but things that actually get the job done and get the job done pretty well. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope I didn't talk too much. Some people say that I do, but I just want to lay everything out on the table, make sure I don't forget any details. And there's always the fast forward controls with YouTube. There's a lot of freedom. You can skip to the end of the video. You can watch from the beginning. You can do whatever you want. You can play it and fast forward. YouTube's pretty flexible with their options. I'm not trying to be snotty by saying that, but those are options out there. So if you do want to know the details, they're here for you. If not, just skip ahead. Thank you as always for watching. I really do appreciate it. Click the subscribe button if you haven't already, and the little bell icon for notifications of new videos, and we will see you again in another video. So I'm currently experimenting with how to get the lacquer off of the frets of this Telecaster. You can see this one I've done here, taped it up on the fretboard itself, and I took some quadruple zero steel wool to the fret. Now I'm hoping that I didn't take the crown off the fret. That's the only thing I'm worried about. I don't think steel wool, this light of steel wool, will do something like that, and I've done a little bit of research. I don't think that's the case, but you can see it's fairly shiny and all the lacquer's gone off, at least the top. There could be a little bit left on the sides. I'm not really worried about that. You can see these other frets here have got some of the lacquer that's come off just by me playing the guitar, doing bends and things like that. So I can feel it. It feels kind of rough and chippy on those frets. So my plan is right now to go ahead with the steel wool. I could do a razor. I've seen some people do kind of a really sharp razor and score it along the edge of the frets. But with the status of the frets as they are right now, the way that some of it's chipped off and some of it hasn't, I don't really think that method's gonna work. From what I understand, you need to do that when the lacquer's fairly fresh and a little bit more flexible. If I did it with the frets like they are now, I think I would just get chipping off everywhere, and I don't really think the razor would do a lot of good. So this took me a little bit of time for the fret, maybe a few minutes. So it may take a long time or a pretty good while to do all the frets, but at this stage, that's my plan. So you obviously want to protect the fretboard when you do something like this. You have a couple of options. Some people use those fancy fret guards from, say, somewhere like Stuart McDonald or a luthier store. You also could use even like an aluminum can, cut it sort of to size, and then cut a strip down the middle with some tin snips or something like that. I was actually going to try to do that, but I couldn't find an aluminum can around anywhere. So what I've been doing is really just recycling these 2 pieces of painter's tape. You could do the whole fretboard, but I think that's kind of overkill unless you're trying to do all the frets at one time. I'm doing individual frets. So, I'm like literally taking these 2 pieces of tape and just transferring them down the fretboard as I go to protect the fretboard. If they are going to lose their adhesiveness or something like that, obviously I'll just get some new pieces of tape, but whatever does the trick. And this steel wool is not like 150 grit sandpaper. It's, it's not super abrasive. So you just want something there to protect it. Also, anytime you work with steel wool on an electric guitar, you want to cover up the pickups with something like painter's tape, as I'm using here, or masking tape, whatever it may be, something that will come off easily. But you don't want the pieces of steel wool sticking on the magnets of your pickups because you may not be able to get them off. You probably will not unless you do something like this. So the idea is to put down some tape, and then once you're done, you can like vacuum or kind of sweep up as best you can any of the shavings. And then one other precautionary step is you can take another piece of tape and put the sticky part down on top of this part, and that will kind of trap any kind of shavings that are left, and then you take all that off. So again, the idea is just to keep any of those metal shavings off the magnets of your pickups because you don't want that. They could interfere with the magnetic pull, and you want your pickups to be as efficient and as well working as possible.